Are the Pelicans screwing up their tank? Well, it feels like they are. I'll tell you what, grabbing a few wins here and there is a good thing. It's a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday, that Mardi Gras weekend, this past weekend, got a little bit the best of me, and so apologize for no show on Monday. We will have a show tomorrow as the Pelicans play on Fat Tuesday. That's what this episode is, Mardi Gras Day episode, against the Los Angeles Lakers. We'll recap that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. I want to get into something with the Saints that's actually pretty revealing about New Orleans later in the week, too. But in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, we're going to talk about the Pelicans screwing up their tank. Seems like it. Just beating the Utah Jazz, right? Getting a win over the Phoenix Suns. It's not quite what you think. And getting a few wins here and there isn't a bad thing. We'll look at that in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And also look at a Cooper Flagg injury, some things working with Zion Williamson right now. All of that is going to be in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everyday. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Shout out to all the everydayers that I saw out there on the parade route this week, and a lot of Pelicans gear too, which was really awesome. So the Pelicans beat the Utah Jazz on Sunday night by 128-121. We can get into this game, but look, the Utah Jazz are playing a lot of people you've probably never heard of before. They're resting guys. They're not playing guys like Walker Kessler, Larry Markkinen, John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton. Like basically every true NBA player they have didn't play in this one. So they get the win, right? And look, Zion Williamson looks good during this stretch. 24 points for him, 9 assists, 6 rebounds on 11 for 18 shooting. Kelly Olynyk, 26 points on 10 of 14 shooting. CJ McCollum, 25. Trey Murphy with 20. When 4 starters score 20 points, at least for New Orleans right now, you know that you're running into a pretty bad team. And that's what this is. So when you look at them getting some of these wins here, look, if they want to play Zion, and we'll talk more about that in the next segment, and I think that's a good thing. If you still want to play Trey, CJ on occasion, and you kind of have to play those guys against a Utah Jazz team that is not even doing ethical tanking, just outright tempting the basketball gods kind of tanking with things like that. Yeah, you're going to win some games. And it's really going to be as simple as that. And when you look at that group of guys, there's some talent there for what New Orleans is doing. So they're going to win some games. And you might be thinking no, this is a bad thing. They should shut guys down too, so that they can kind of out-tank the Utah Jazz, and the Jazz are in a better position against New Orleans right now when it comes to, the race to the bottom here. New Orleans, after going 4-1 over their last 5, is now looking at the 4th overall pick as opposed to 1 or 2 where they were that, just recently. And yeah, they don't want to win too many games, but streaks like this are going to happen. And more importantly, more on this again in the next segment, you're seeing them figure some things out around Zion Williamson. So while the Utah Jazz know that guys like John Collins and John Collins and Jordan Clarkson aren't long for their team, they have a reason to kind of just shut everybody down. Larry Markkinen playing with Walker Kessler isn't necessarily going to tell you a lot, or Larry Markkinen and John Collins isn't going to tell you a lot when, one of those guys, Markkinen should still be there, but another guy or two isn't going to be on their team long term. New Orleans has more to figure out than the Utah Jazz do. And while, yes, a draft pick, a top 5 pick needs to be a priority, it's one of many. And that's why getting some wins here and there isn't something that truly bothers me. They've definitely figured out something working with that starting front court of Yves Missi at the 5, Kelly Olynyk at the 4, and then Zion at the 3. Playing Zion as small forward for a while, giving you more rebounding and things. seemingly is paying pretty good dividends so far against admittedly not great competition. And that's worth keeping in mind too. You know, the Phoenix Suns that team is in a bad spot. Like that team's just bad, y'all. I've watched a lot of them recently. They are a rough team. Like, they're going to have to blow that squad up this offseason. So New Orleans playing their starting lineup, you know, as it is, yeah, it might actually get a win. And so you beat them. You know, going against that Jazz team, like, yeah, you're going to beat some of these like really garbage teams. But there are going to be moments when they are resting guys, right? CJ and Zion did not play in that second game against the Phoenix Suns, and New Orleans lost 125-108. Really good game from Yves Missi there with 24 points. Hawkins with 24 points in the start as well. So you're going to have games like that where, yeah, they just shut guys down. You know, literally, CJ was out with rest. Zion's at least is returned to competition reconditioning, whatever that means. So they're still going to have these games where they shut players down and they know that they're going to lose. And we've heard them say openly that they're going to kind of try and do a little bit more development. At the very least, the Pelicans have 3 more back-to-backs remaining going forward. You know, they're at Houston, then home against Memphis on March 9th. They're at Detroit, and then home against Philly the next night. And then you have at Milwaukee, and then home against Miami on April 11th. The one for Philly is the 24th. Zion's not going to play in those 3 games. They're all home games, which is annoying. But he's not going to play in those. And you're likely going to lose those 3 games for it. And so they are still tanking even if they get a win here and there. And I think one thing that's worth keeping in mind when you look at some of the games that they have upcoming, New Orleans has the 7th toughest strength of schedule remaining. So they got through some of the easier part of this, and now things ramp up a little bit more. So yeah, you're going to beat the Jazz. You might win one of those against the Phoenix Suns, but when you have a game against OKC, 2 games against the Lakers, 1 against Memphis, 2 against Houston, 2 against Milwaukee, 2 against Detroit, right? Those are all teams that are trying to go out and compete. You have a game against the Orlando Magic remaining too. That's not going to be the easiest out. 1 against Miami Heat, which are trying to compete a little bit too. You know, your 4 easiest games are Charlotte, Brooklyn, the 76ers, and the Spurs remaining. So, yeah, New Orleans is going to get a win here and there, but for the most part, their schedule is still pretty tough. And I don't think they're screwing up the tank whatsoever, even if we would prefer them to be in the 1 or 2 spot as opposed to the 4th. But the lottery odds are still flattened enough that I'm not overly concerned about it. Winning is still fun, and it's important to see some of these guys play together and see and figure things out. This is a team that wants to be competitive next year. And if they're going to try and go in and be like, we're fighting for a playoff spot, we're not doing a rebuild or things like that, well, get as much data to know going forward, treat this as training camp, and the team is kind of doing that. And let's look at what's working so well with Zion Williamson, Kelly Olynyk, and Yves Missi up in the front court, and how other things around that are working too. Then we're going to get in some transaction news, a Cooper Flagg injury, all of that and more in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. And thanks to DashPass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. Look, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just dropped 50 tonight. So it's super simple. When any player, like SGA, scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, DashPass members get 50% off and order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. So whether you're staying up late watching highlights or you just need a midnight snack, use DashPass to grab something delicious while saving big. And if you need a quick and easy lunch the next day, with DashPass, you can get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus now, you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. So sign up for DashPass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, DashPass members get 50% off and order the next day up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active DashPass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter, completely free over at lockedondaily.com. Just scroll down till you see Locked On Pelicans, click on the logo, put in your email. You're going to get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox Monday through Friday. Yeah, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage. So let's get into some of the games here. We just went over why, they're winning a little bit right now. They're not going to continue to win going forward. I also would not be shocked if the team shuts Zion Williamson down, say, like the final week of the season. That April 13th game, the finale against OKC versus Miami on the 11th, maybe even on the 10th at Milwaukee, something like that, which basically guarantees you 3 losses. And that still puts you in a pretty good spot. Overall, I'm just not worried because, look, New Orleans is figuring something out. And I like that because right now, this season is all about next season, as unfun as that is. And New Orleans needs to kind of figure out who are we keeping, who are we not, kind of like all of those things. And is it working? Is it like, no, we don't have an answer without DeJounte Murray, so we're not going to be good. And that's going to inform this team on where they go from here. And in figuring all of that out, basically having answers is a really important thing, in my opinion. And over this stretch that we've seen the team run a big like Kelly Olynyk or even Carlo Makovich in there alongside Yves Missi and put Zion at the 3, it seems to be working for the most part. Now, I want to put this caveat in of they played some like just not good teams, essentially, right? A couple of games against the Spurs isn't going to do it. The Suns, as I said, are completely trash and garbage, and I don't like it. So overall, I want to see if this group like truly works or doesn't, and what does that mean going forward? And I think that's going to be a really important thing for us to try and learn about the squad. So I'm trying to pull up the data right now of basically Zion. Well, we just want Zion at the 3, essentially. So right now, that's 302 possessions, and it's a minus 4.6 differential here. But some of that is minutes with Jeremiah Robinson. If we take out Jeremiah Robinson Earl, that's going to kind of give us a better set of data because he's not going to be part of this going forward, and those lineups with him really don't look good. But it does look like certain lineups are potentially starting to kind of work. And if New Orleans can figure that out, that's an important thing. Against the Utah Jazz, you saw basically everyone feast. Zion, Kelly Olynyk, and Yves Missi. Even in the loss with no Zion Williamson playing, Yves Missi against the Phoenix Suns had 24 points and is showing you that he can be a complementary piece here. New Orleans in these games is doing good work in the front court, basically not losing second chance points, scoring points in the paint. New Orleans had 76 points in the paint against the Utah Jazz the other night. Now, again, it's the Utah Jazz. They're terrible. They're terrible. The Phoenix Suns, it's not like you really hang your hat on that win. And then your 2 other games basically were against the San Antonio Spurs. That's not ideal. Here you've lost to Dallas and you've lost to Phoenix during that stretch with, Zion Williamson, not playing a ton in these games, and that's being that here. And the real teams they played, Dallas mainly, Zion played, and they still lost. But it does seem like this is helping you when it comes to rebounding and limiting what some of your opponent wants to do. They out-rebounded the Dallas Mavericks for the most part in that game with that kind of jumbo big lineup out there. So you're starting to see like maybe there's going to be something to these kind of lineups, and I think that's a really important thing. You've got to figure out what works next season, what doesn't here, and if that means you win a couple of games here and there, generally, I'm going to be okay with it for the most part here. Now, it's not also fully working out, and I think that's an important thing. CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Kelly Olynyk, and Yves Missi has played 99 possessions together, and they have a negative 6.1 net rating. So that's not an ideal thing when you start to look at that here, because conceivably that could be a starting lineup for you next season, potentially. Now, if you put Carlo Makovich in there, it's not much better. CJ, Trey, Zion, Carlo, and Missi is 70 possessions and a negative 18.8 net rating, and frankly, that number is a little bit surprising. So a lot of that stems from that game against the Utah Jazz. You know, they had to come back a little bit against the Phoenix Suns as well. We'll see, but I want to know if that works or doesn't. And if you get enough data this year to be like, it doesn't work, cool. Go out and maybe try and upgrade it in some capacity and see if that's what's going to really help you with everything. So that actually, never mind. That I'm looking at some of the incorrect data here too. Let's see, filter lineups. But the ones with Zion are still in there. You know, that tells us maybe it's not actually working like we think it is, and that's a really important thing. You know, we'll do the show of should they trade Zion, should they blow it up, all of that stuff. But I think that could depend on where you end up in the draft. And frankly, this isn't a team that wants to go through something like that right now. We like winning games. Everyone kind of hates this season because of the situation the team finds themselves in. So they want to keep going forward. And if Zion keeps playing like he is, and he looks really good, doesn't he? And we went over the per 36-minute numbers at the end of last week. If he looks like he's the number one guy on a championship contending team, and the numbers during the stretch, limited minutes, keep that in mind, are really, really good, right? Just had his first career triple-double. We went over those numbers. And that win over the Utah Jazz, he still looked very, very good. Again, you know, but you can only play who's in front of you. But Zion with 24 points on 11 of 18 shooting, he only got to the line 3 times because there was no resistance up there. But that's still pretty good efficiency. If you want that like insane efficiency, that's where you need to get to the line a ton. But if, look, it's going to be a Swiss cheese defense, him just getting up there and doing that thing, yeah, that totally works. So they need to figure out, is this real? Is this fake? I'm not even sure right now. You know, that's what we want to see the remainder of the season. But if Zion's the best player, this is the point I wanted to make earlier. If Zion Williamson is the best player on a championship team for you, you need to figure it out around him. You need to get him playing well. And it's just as simple as that. At that point, the draft pick becomes secondary to that sort of thing. And truthfully, I agree with it. I think Cooper Flagg is going to be really good in the NBA. I think Ace Bailey is going to be really good too, and Dylan Harper. But if they're not going to be like 1A on a championship team, you need to focus more on Zion than it comes to the draft pick. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. You know, I don't know if they necessarily project to that kind of level right now. So Zion playing well and doing what he's doing really does need to be the focus for this team. And I think that's the most important thing. And right now it's kind of looking like that. And if Zion does that and you end up with the 5th pick, 4th pick, 6th pick, I think you're in a pretty good position to get somebody that will make a difference for the team and be the kind of player that you need. VJ Edgecombe could easily be your CJ McCollum replacement, you know, or 6th man in the future. And I think that's an important thing. He's shooting the ball really, really well, right? I'm going to try and nail the name here. It's Kasparis, and I think it's, I had it written down, the phonetic spelling, but it's Yakusionis. And he looks like he can run an NBA offense right now. If you get down playing well, yeah, maybe you miss out on Cooper Flagg. But if you get one of those guys that's going to be a solid starter for you and help you, look, that's still a little bit of the best of both worlds. Yeah, it's ideally Zion and Cooper Flagg, but if you don't get the data around Zion and you have Zion and Cooper Flagg and you still can't figure out what you need, that isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. So figuring this out now, learning what you need to learn, putting themselves in a very good position like that, yeah, that's what I want to see. And to me, that's some of the most important things here for the New Orleans Pelicans to do. So there you go. They're learning things about Zion. He's playing well. He looks like he can be the best guy on a championship level team. Keep rolling with that. So coming up next here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, there is a Cooper Flagg injury that I'll tell you about, but you don't need to worry too much about it. You also have a new two-way player for New Orleans. What could that mean going forward? Let's break it all down. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by OpenPhone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night, and as your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. So that's where OpenPhone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. So for just $15 a month, basically the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you have a rundown of your call and action items the second that you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. The automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring that you never miss an opportunity to engage. So right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have an existing phone number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no additional charge. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans, as I cough, your first listen today and every day here. It is the Fat Tuesday, the Mardi Gras episode of Locked On Pelicans, and I appreciate you making the show part of your day here. Happy Mardi Gras to you and yours. Weather is going to hopefully be good in the morning. We'll see about the afternoon. Pelicans play tonight against the Los Angeles Lakers. We will recap that in tomorrow's episode because I do think that is going to be an interesting game to see how they go up against one of the hotter teams in the league. Does that kind of front court with Zion work? Does it not against a pretty thin team? They better take advantage of that. That's what you want to see here. So we'll of course talk about that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints needs to be your second listen today. He's back from the combine, giving you all of the tea, all the info that you want about what the Saints are going to do in the draft and beyond here. Go check out Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if you saw news about a Cooper Flagg injury, don't stress too much. He got poked in the eye the other day, basically against Florida State, didn't finish the game, but they checked him out, said he was fine. And there was actually something that was kind of telling about this to me. And so Cooper Flagg basically bruised his eyelid. So not a scary injury. It seems like he's going to be fine when it comes to everything. The Duke head coach, John Shire, said something kind of interesting too, because he'd said, quote, obviously, if Cooper stayed down, something happened. He doesn't stay down on the ground. Think about that for a second. Basically, what he's saying is, Cooper Flagg's tough. Little injuries don't do anything to him. If he goes down, it's got to be kind of significant here, and what the issue was. So they basically held him out because they didn't want to risk anything with it, but it wasn't really a big deal. And overall, Cooper Flagg will be fine, and I don't think it's going to necessarily do any. I don't even know if he's going to miss really time or anything like that. But I just like the fact that he's a tough player and his head coach is this dude doesn't get hurt. So when we see something happen, one, we take it very seriously. But this is the type of team that just needs something like that. Doesn't it kind of feel that way with this squad of adding some, I don't even want to call that toughness necessarily, but just durability maybe is the right word for that sort of thing. Seems like they could really use that on this team. I do think they need to do deeper dives, maybe, as much as they can, into medical history and things like that for some of these players, given what we've seen before. We don't want to go through another situation where it's Zion and Ingram and they just don't play together because of all of the injuries. Look, you can maybe handle one of those guys, but that's something that really hurt New Orleans more often than not. Obviously, right? Super deep analysis here of both of your star players never playing, basically, is just not tenable going forward. So hearing that about Cooper Flagg and kind of the toughness that he has, and that's not something that's the norm for him, that makes me feel good about his future, even more, but he's obviously the #1 pick. We feel pretty good about that too. So the Pelicans also announced they are signing Lester Quinones to a two-way deal. In a corresponding move, they've waived Jalen Crutcher. Crutcher's been in and off two ways for them for a while now here. Quinones is 6'4", 208 pounds, basically two guard. He's played for the Birmingham Squadron this season, appeared in 27 games. He's averaging 22.4 points, 8.1 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 1.3 steals in 37 minutes per game. Quinones has appeared in 45 NBA games over 3 seasons with the Golden State Warriors and Philadelphia 76ers. His career averages are 4.1 points, 1.8 rebounds, 0.9 assists in about 9.5 minutes per game. It's not much of a move here. I think the Pelicans are just kind of looking for the next two-way guy that they really believe in, that they feel could do a really good job here, and see if, they kind of work out. It gives them cheap depth at positions that they need. And when you just need these guys to kind of come in and score, a la Brandon Boston Jr., who was on a two-way till they converted him to the actual team, I think makes a lot of sense. I don't think Quinones is going to be a guy that's going to make it this year, but maybe it's someone to roll the dice on when you go into next season, and you can keep him on the steal or not, but it gives you a good look at him, gets him around the team a little bit more. And even if New Orleans is doing this just to reward two-way, their G League guys, and give them some time on a two-way deal when the opportunity arises, I like that too. That probably gets players wanting to play for the G League team, knowing that you have a realistic chance of getting called up. And that can be a useful thing. Anything that helps you, right? Basically is what it comes down to. Anything that helps you when it comes to all of that is only going to be a good thing. I think New Orleans has done a good job with the G League team, with the two ways as well. Historically, they've done a very good job when it comes to that. So overall, good move. Happy with that. There we go. There's not much else to it when it comes to that sort of thing. But overall, pretty happy with the way they've done that. We'll see if Lester Quinones has anything that he can show us, but he'll probably get some run at some point when it comes to this team, as they hopefully prioritize development a little bit sooner rather than later, but still get some wins, make Zion look good. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. Have a happy Mardi Gras. I will be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the Laker game, see what we learned, because I am going to be watching that 3-man front court lineup of Zion, Kelly Olynyk, and Yves Missi. And we'll see if it does well against the Los Angeles Lakers. It should. If it doesn't, we got to talk about it. So that's it. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Happy Mardi Gras, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.